spread of coronavirus is accelerating.
We're seeing false, misleading information. It's kind of strange.
And unprecedented quarantine. Wuhan and central China and nearby cities in lockdown.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. We're pointing our lens at China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, starting with the coronavirus and Beijing's efforts to keep the outbreak and the coverage contained. The talking heads who gave up their anchor chairs to serenade Chinese audiences about the virus, plus contraband books, a forced confession, and a life in exile. The bookseller who fled Hong Kong for Taipei. And the death of Kobe Bryant, the tweet the Washington Post found institutionally damaging. About a week and a half ago, on January 23rd, the Chinese authorities shut down the city of Wuhan. Population 11 million, and ground zero for the outbreak of the coronavirus. In short order, 17 more cities were quarantined. The total number of people affected, nearly 60 million. The orders issued by Beijing were significant, but late in coming, because the first official case of this virus was confirmed almost 2 months ago, on the 8th of December, 2019. It took that long before China's state-controlled news media stopped downplaying the seriousness of the outbreak and started providing the kind of information that can save lives. By that stage, however, millions of Chinese citizens had passed through the affected region, unaware of the risks involved. The death toll is now in the hundreds, the number infected in the thousands, and the coronavirus, like the coverage of this story, has gone global. Our starting point this week is the city of Wuhan. No one can control the timing of a viral outbreak, a potential pandemic. But in a country like China, they can control, or at least try to control, what people know about it. On January 18th, the city of Wuhan, China's 7th largest, hosted a potluck dinner attended by about 40,000 families. The participants would not have known that 2 weeks earlier in Hong Kong, the media were already comparing this virus to the SARS outbreak of 2003, warning it could be moving from human to human. There was none of that in the local media coverage of the giant dinner in Wuhan, not even a mention that we could find of the coronavirus, the fact that all those families may have been at risk. And like local news outlets, the national media, most of which are controlled by Beijing, were focusing on other stories.
We had stories about Xi Jinping going to Myanmar, Xi Jinping going to Yunnan and talking about how strong the Chinese military is, and kind of buried a little bit and tucked underneath is the story about the coronavirus outbreak that is at the forefront of everyone's attention.
This started to become a big story, not because of what we heard inside China, but because of what we started to hear from sources outside of China. We started to do some reporting going out to Beijing railway station to try to see what the feeling was.
People here are looking to the government to do more.
We spoke to 12 people on that day. 7 out of those people had no idea what we were talking about. And the people who did know about it said to us, I think the government has it in hand. I think they know what they're doing.
The state is monitoring and censoring what is said about the outbreak on both mainstream and social media. On January 1st, police in Wuhan arrested 8 people for, quote, spreading rumors online, sending a clear message in the process.
警方提示，网络不是法外之地，在网上发布信息言论应遵守法律法规。
It turned out that all 8 were medical professionals. They were predicting a SARS-type outbreak, and they weren't wrong. A few weeks later, a Hong Kong-based journalist, Lu Rose Lucho, who made her name covering the SARS story, wrote a piece for the Chinese internet giant Tencent. She focused on the need for transparency at the time of an outbreak, the obligation to keep citizens informed. Her story was online for 10 hours and then just disappeared.
My experience is a vivid example of the censorship in China. I was invited by Tencent to write an article. After they deleted the article, I tried to contact them and to figure out what's happened, and they have no idea. There's no black and white written down rules for what kind of information should be allowed or not be allowed.
The initial shortage of official information spawned a contagion of conspiracy theories and rumors on everything from causes to cures, most of which were spread over WeChat, a multi-purpose app with more than 1 billion users. They included allegations that the virus was created in a biological weapons lab, that Bill Gates was somehow involved, that it can be cured by drinking bleach.
Misleading messages about how you can prevent being infected by the coronavirus by, say, chewing on raw garlic or taking some kind of saline solution. Censors trying to strike a delicate balance between getting rid of this kind of misinformation, but at the same time allowing some kind of public discourse to continue.
Social media, messages, rumors saying, their local medical system were overwhelmed, right? Hospitals run out of supplies, but the city and the province, they would say, okay, we're in good shape, we are under control. It is a very delicate balance to strike for any government. On the one hand, you don't want to frighten citizens, right? On the other hand, you never know if they tell them the truth, what would happen.
By January 20th, the number of confirmed cases had climbed to 200 plus. Airports in several countries were screening passengers coming out of China, and President Xi Jinping finally broke his silence. The state-run media got the message and then confirmed the increasingly obvious: the coronavirus was moving from human to human. And like an overloaded dam that finally breaks, Baidu, the Chinese Google, exploded with the kind of information that Beijing had tried to contain.
Once Xi Jinping gave that statement, it's as if the whole country started to mobilize. Things started to happen. People started to spread information about what to do to keep safe. There was more information about where this virus came from. Within 1 week, the government went from saying this is preventable and controllable, don't panic, to the city of Wuhan being in lockdown. And I think that if the information had been more forthcoming at the beginning, if there had been more public awareness a few days earlier, what could have been done at that stage to prevent this from spreading further?
It is not just a media crisis, it's a biopolitical crisis, right? So we have the national authorities want to make sure, number one, their populations stay healthy. And then another concern, I think, is international, right? And we don't want to be exporting viruses, right? And we want to be viewed as a responsible international players. But I do expect there will be that huge wave of reflection, criticism, and then looking for accountability in the media.
In 2003, Beijing suppressed coverage of the SARS outbreak for even longer than it did this time, nearly 6 months. Back then, the Chinese media played a large part in pressuring the government to come clean. But it was a different time. China, still new to capitalism, was experimenting with other reforms, gradually giving journalists more freedom from censorship. But those days are gone. The regional newspapers that provided some of the best SARS-related journalism have since had their wings clipped, along with most Chinese news outlets. And while Beijing has spent less time in denial mode than it did in 2003, while it's been quicker to call this story what it is, a potential pandemic, it wasn't the journalism, at least not in China, that got it there.
We see kind of two large trends that have occurred since 2003 in terms of information. People have a lot more access to information than back in 2003, but at the same time, the state has become much more restrictive and repressive. It's really cracked down on civil society groups, on media, on activists, on intellectuals, and for that reason alone, I think we're going to see much less questioning from these groups this time around, just because they've been under so much pressure from the state.
No one, not even China, can control the timing of a viral outbreak. And nothing exposes the weaknesses of such a media system like a story that comes out of the blue. It happened in 2003, and history has repeated itself. If nothing changes, we'll probably see the denials, the delays, the withholding of information, and censorship all repeated with the next coronavirus, when China once again will be counting the cost of control in lives lost. And finally, back to where we began, with the coronavirus and the state-controlled media in China, having not exactly bathed themselves in glory at the outset of this story, you might think that this would be a good time for certain Chinese media outlets to lie low and direct attention elsewhere. The Shanghai Media Group figured that no, it was in fact the opportune moment to take 35 of their presenters, trade their suits in for sweaters that say, "Stay together, fight the virus," and perform a song and dance routine, a tribute to the doctors and nurses out there trying to save lives. Maybe they thought that with nearly 50 million people under lockdown, there would be a captive audience out there. Our prescription for the Shanghai Media Group: less entertainment, please. Your viewers would much rather OD on real news. We'll see you next time here at the Listening Post.